Are you able to let people in while I talk, Will? Are you
I
getting a notification?
I think, yeah, I think so. I think I can manage. I'll make it real big.
Perfect. So everyone, my name is Amy Rillinger. I'm the director of the Attleboro Public Library, and we are here today to talk with Will Dowd as part of our NEA Big Read of the book Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tausig. And I actually can't see myself on camera anymore, but this is the book that we are reading for the Big Read. And it is the whole idea of the Big Read is to bring people together around story and to find connections and to share perspectives and listen to other voices, but all based on a book, a story, pieces of a story. And I think that tonight's event is the perfect example of that. When we decided to read Sitting Pretty, Will was one of the first people that I thought of because I am a fan of his work and also knew that he could speak so well to both the creative side of what we're doing and then the technology side and the adaption side and how we learn and grow. So Will, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I was absolutely thrilled when you reached.
I am going to give everyone a quick bio on Will. Obviously a writer, artist based outside of Boston. His first collection of essays, which is how I was introduced to him, is Areas of Fog, which was named a Massachusetts Book Award nonfiction must read, which I have to say you should all go out and buy or borrow a copy. Will earned his Master's of Science at MIT as a John Lyons Fellow, an MFA in Creative Writing from the New York University as a Jacob K. Javits Fellow in Poetry, and a BA from Boston College as a Presidential Scholar. So varied background. He's also the recipient of the WPR Creative Grant from Harvard University's Woodbury Poetry Room, the St. Botolph Club Foundation Emerging Artist Award, Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Award, and a Key West Literary Seminar Scholarship. His writing and artwork have appeared in the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, NPR, Writer's Digest, Lit Hub, Poets and Writers Online, Tin House Online, and elsewhere. So that's just a nice reminder to me to, if you don't already follow Will on Facebook, he posts his comics and the Boston Globe that are just fascinating pieces of nonfiction and artwork together. So highly recommend that. So I'm just going to fangirl over here in the corner and without further ado, let Will take over speaking duties and I will take over the waiting room.
Yes.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Amy. That was amazing to listen to. The only thing more impressive would be my list of rejections over the years and the grants I did not win and things that didn't work out. But thank you. It's always a little bit embarrassing when somebody goes through your resume because it sounds like a victory campaign. And that was something I actually wanted to talk about right at the top. This subject of this talk is creativity and technology, all kind of under the umbrella of disability and how disability interacts with those two. And so I wanted to say at the top that if I was tuning into a talk like this, I would expect to hear somebody talking about how they overcame adversity and you know, have now they're speaking from this podium looking down at you with authority and grandiosity, and that is not the case at all. I really don't want to project that false impression. I am still very much struggling, as are most people probably listening, with different issues, and I wanted to just tell you all that I feel like I'm here as a peer. I feel like if we were in a room, we'd be sitting with our chairs in a circle, and I also really appreciate everybody coming. I was thinking that many of you probably have a disability yourself, but then there's also people here who don't have a disability, and I'm especially want to welcome them because Disability is something that I think we can all agree is probably not discussed enough. Um, Based on how it's judged, it could be as high as 1 in 5 Americans can be considered disabled. And also the healthiest person today could become disabled tomorrow. So it's something that definitely affects us all. And I just appreciate everybody coming and listening, no matter your background. And I also wanted to say at the top, this is a very long preamble, it's a constitutional length, that I'm just going to tell my story. I know disability is a very potent subject. It draws a lot of emotion, and that's because it's very political, and the culture around disability influences the politics, which can be life and death for some people with disabilities. So understandably, there's a lot of strong emotions, and I just want to make clear that I'm only talking for myself. I wouldn't pretend to talk for any other, the disability community at large. And if I ever slip into that tonight, and it seems like I'm making sweeping statements, just know that it's sort of bracketed and an acknowledgement that I'm just one person. Okay, so I wanted to start by talking about the first medical condition I had that I would consider disability, because it had an onset and it took some things away from me, and then it has not changed. So to me, that was my first experience with a disability, not an illness. And this started in 2009 when I was doing an MFA program in New York. And I noticed I'd had some eye trouble since the very beginning of college, but it was getting worse. And suddenly the words on the pages of my books were just doing some weird things. They weren't sort of moving around like in a dramatic way you might see dramatized on film. They were just sort of like individual leaves on a tree that's in the wind, and so everything's kind of shaking and not steady and kind of interweaving a little bit. And so it just became a real struggle and a strain on my eyes to try to pin those words, try to make them all still and make them stick to the page. I should say that this was really distressing for me because I feel like I grew up in books. I would compare it to, I think, the albatross. It doesn't, like, albatross don't land on the earth for like the first number of years that they're alive. And I felt the same way. I feel like I was just flying in fantasy books for much of my childhood. And so that always felt like home. And so when these books were like doors that closed to me and I wasn't able to read anymore, it felt more like a homesickness and an exile than anything. And so it was a really challenging time in my life, and I didn't handle it well at all because I'd never had something like that happen. I'm a very type A person, and I thought, well, this is a problem, and I'm gonna fix it. And it's not fixed. It's never been fixed. I mean, who knows? It could be, but unlikely at this point. And I didn't accept that for years and years and years. But I guess I just wanted to say that because there's something important that I eventually discovered in this experience over the last 15 years or so, is acceptance. And there's such a thing, which I wasn't familiar with it. It wasn't in my vocabulary. And that's been a real education, and that's applied to a lot of other areas of my life too. So if you find yourself newly hobbled by some kind of medical issue, it's something to keep in mind and look into. There's a lot of great books on acceptance, and it doesn't mean giving up, but it can make your life a little more livable while you're in the place that you are. So when this happened, I used a lot of technology to try to get myself back into reading, to try to get in again. And this was through audio because my ears were working. So I did a lot of audiobooks, but audiobooks are very selective unless it's a sort of bestseller or kind of a newer commercial title. Many old books, they don't have audio books. So I was using this tripod type machine that I called Excalibur. I think it's called Voice X, but I called it Excalibur. It was, and you would take like this picture of a page of text, you know, from some old book that I really wanted to read, and then it would convert it on the computer into text, and then it would read it to you in a robotic voice. But it took, I mean, 15 minutes for a page at least, at you know, at minimum. So now, of course, on the iPhone, it has incredible apps that do that in an instant. And so I was a little bit too early for that, but I did want to encourage people, if if you're having a similar situation and you need access to text, the iPhone has wonderful apps. And if the iPhone is out of your price range, I would recommend talking to Mass Rehab, which for those in Massachusetts is a vocational program. They were great. And they also hooked me up with Easter seals, which is another tip I want to give anybody dealing with this. And also I joined the Perkins Library, which is a really old, really fabulous library in the state. That was completely groundbreaking, catering to people who are had vision disabilities, and they still have this amazing audio book library. They're not commercial. They're done by volunteers, and so that's where you get those out of the way books that I like to find. You know, I used to like to hunt down and the corners of libraries and stuff. And so so Perkins Library, if you're in need of such books on audio. Okay, so there was also the problem not just with reading, but now with writing, because I was such a writer since I was little. I used to, before I could write, I used to dictate stories to my mom, who would write them down. And I found myself in the middle of an MFA program, still, of course, wanting to write, needing to write to get the degree. And I tried to use that old technique from when I was pre-literate and dictate into a recorder. And it just did not work for me. I feel like I've never in my life left a publishable voicemail. So it was just did not feel right. And I was really at a loss until I found a program called VoiceOver, which is embedded in every Apple product. Even if you don't use VoiceOver, you may have encountered it by accidentally pressing something, and then all of a sudden your phone is talking to you and you don't know why, and it's really hard to turn off, and you probably brought it to the store, and that's VoiceOver. So that's something that basically you can use in your computer without needing the visual feedback. It's giving you audio feedback. So the idea is you can turn your screen to black and start, you can navigate into a Word document and start typing, and it's read back to you in one of these text-to-speech voices, which is kind of a robotic voice like a Siri. And that was very difficult to get used to. In a movie, there'd be like a montage, and it would be like 30 seconds and then you're an expert. But it just was such a grind, and it took so long because I was so used to having visual feedback to be able to just hop around a document, pick out what I needed to edit, remind myself what I had just written. And now it was audio. It was very difficult to find, like, to really pinpoint where you were. And then a lot of it was writing. I felt like I was writing into the dark because you didn't have so much ability to see what you've just done. So it really felt like it was going somehow into the unknown. It was like, throwing words down a well that doesn't echo back. And so it took a long time for me to get used to that. But I made progress. And the way I made progress was, first I had to pick out my text-to-speech voice. And this was a kind of a Goldilocks process. There's a lot of different voices that come with computers. Siri is one of them. Of course, everybody's now familiar with that, probably familiar with Alexa. But at the time, I don't even think they had Siri or Alexa. And so I had my pick, and I went through and tried different ones, and I ended up with this robotic voiced Alex, and that became kind of a part of me to a degree. It still was very robotic and a bit bothersome, but I started to get accustomed. I really did. There were times when I didn't even hear Alex like as a robot. It was just information coming in right in. And I wanted to demonstrate this a little bit. The only cool superpower I've gained from this experience is that slowly I got better and better at listening to the text to speech voices and hearing them, and kind of without knowing, I would just make them faster and faster. And so now I freak people out when I'm listening because they think there's no way you can hear that. I just wanted to play, this is the Samantha voice, and this is the speed that I would listen to like an article. I just grabbed the beginning of The Great Gatsby. I'll just play this for a second so you can hear the speed.
In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the outcome that you had. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments. A habit that has opened up many curious acres to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran wars. The abnormal mind.
Okay, so I don't know if oh, sorry, I might have hit somebody. Might have hit a button by accident asking somebody to unmute, but I apologize for that if I did. So yeah, so that was something that you can, if someone had played that for me 10 years ago, I would have heard just it would have sounded like a tape record, like a VCR eating, tape. But now it just sounds completely legible. So that was interesting. I wanted to share that because it gives a little bit of hope that what can start off as a metaphorical crutch, you can get pretty good, and suddenly it's not so slow, and you can do things that other people can't. So I actually did a story about this issue of picking up my voices for WBUR, and afterwards I was contacted by a computer science professor in Boston named Rupal Patel, and she is the head of a company, started a company called Vocal ID. She gives a great TED Talk that's been watched, I think, 1 million times. So that's available and it's worth listening to. Essentially, she was working in this space of working with disabilities and accommodations. And she was at a conference, and it really occurred to her that she was seeing young girls who had speechlessness for some, for one reason or another, medically, communicating with a talk board, and it was the Stephen Hawking's voice, for lack of a better name. And it really, to her, it felt very disconnected and sad that a young girl would have this voice that just totally doesn't match as her age or gender, or so she decided to start this company to make bespoke voices. So these would be text-to-speech voices that are designed specifically for one individual. So for example, for a young girl who might have speechlessness, they might use recordings of her sister reading, and maybe if whatever noises she can make, and maybe some from the voice, some voice donors from the voice bank that are in the same age, and they would make these tailored text-to-speech voices. And so it's a very worthy company and cause that I really support. But she reached out to me because she thought that maybe there was a second application potentially for this technology, and that would be for people who have visual issues and are using voiceover, and not just using voiceover to hear the news or something, but to do creative work. Because at least most writers I know, and definitely I am an introvert, and so when I'm doing my creative work, I like to kind of get into this very solitary headspace where I've got a lot of privacy. I don't have anybody looking over my shoulder, and it's just me, because otherwise I'm too self-conscious, and it's harder to take those risks, those creative risks that you need to take. And so using a robotic voice like Alex, who I referenced before, or the one I just played, it does introduce kind of a third party into it, and it's a little it does make you take you a little bit out of a full immersion into the creative flow. So Rupal Patel asked me if I would like if they could use me as a guinea pig, use recordings of my voice and make me a text-to-speech voice that's based on my voice, and have me use it and let them know whether this improved my writing process. So I said yes because I thought this was so cool. Sorry, I've just been a little sick this week, losing my voice. So luckily, so when I did my recordings, I have set top shape with my voice. Tonight I'm using a really good technology for voice, which was invented 5,000 years ago, called hot tea. This is going to keep me going. So I gave them a couple hours of me speaking. They made this voice, and I thought I would play it for you because it was really interesting. I was really struck when they sent it to me and I first heard it, because it sounded eerily good, I thought. And these were just the prototypes. So before I play it for you, I did want to explain what the wording. I used to do, well, I've got a newsletter, but at one point for a while I was doing horoscopes, like joke horoscopes, once a month for people. And so that's where they grabbed this text. So it's going to be me introducing some horoscopes and then giving one of my horoscopes, which is just a joke. So it's not going to make much sense out of context, but I just want you to hear the voice and maybe see what all this fuss is about with these bespoke voices. So first, they have different kind of levels. So this was the first one. I've got two to play you. The second one is even more improved, and now they're working on like the 5th edition. But I'll play you this first one here.
Dear seekers after truth, over the past half year, I've heard the occasional grumbling from newsletter recipients disappointed by their horoscopes. They're always so bleak, they complain. Can't I get a better future? To which I can only reply, I can be bribed. Anyways, here we go.
Okay, so that was an intro to one of my newsletters. And now this was the next version they did, which was a little more precise. And I thought this was pretty great.
Aries. This month, while walking through the park on your lunch hour, you're injured by a public art installation, leading to a well-publicized court case that is settled on the eve of trial, when the defendants offer you a reimbursement of medical expenses and an honorary doctorate of fine arts.
So it still needed work, and they're working on it to get the intonations and everything. But I thought it sounded a lot like me, and certainly there were entire phrases that just were indistinguishable. So I was very impressed, and they asked me actually after this if I would mind if they used my voice as like a generic text to speech that other people could use, like on their computer, like I would be an Alex or a Samantha voice. And I was a little nervous at first because I thought people are gonna be able to like call my bank and empty my accounts with my voice. But they said that they would alter it. They would just alter it enough that it wouldn't be such a deep fake for me. So, anyways, that's the end of this section. I just want to say that this all took place over many years, and it was very much a journey that I kind of went on kicking and screaming, and I got better at this whole acceptance thing, and I got better at this whole looking to technology for exciting opportunities to work around limitations, and then using them to have creative breakthroughs, really. So the first, I would say there's like 2 phases in my journey here. That was the first phase. This is the second phase. So I do cartooning for the Boston Globe. Essentially comic strips, and usually always I tell a story of a historical figure and some anecdote that from their life. I think of them as like biographical haiku, something that is like a flash photo that captures them and captures their life somehow. There's a resonance there. At least that's my pretentious idea. And so I obviously it's like how could I draw with this vision issue? Drawing was something I loved to do as a kid, and painting I did a little bit in college, and then that was out the window for many years. But what was able to do is apply to the St. Patolph Club, which Amy mentioned at the beginning. They're another Boston organization that I would recommend looking into if you're looking for funding for a creative project. And they're a private club, and they give small grants to individual artists every year in the Boston area. So I was able to get one of those grants, and I used it to get what's called an iPad Pro. I feel like Steve Jobs up here. I'm talking so much about Apple. There's I'm not getting any kickbacks. There's similar devices from other companies, but this was the iPad Pro, and what I'm able to do and the way I do my comics is that I do them. I do it digitally. I don't use a pen or paper. I use my finger on the screen, and I do one letter at a time. I mean, I have literally the iPad Pro is this big, and I'll do a C, and then I'll move it. I'll do an A, and then I'll move it. So I'm working at this bizarre scale. It was like if you sort of stretched it out, this entire scale, my cartoon would be like the size of the Sistine Chapel. It's like I'm doing this, I'm like frescoing a ceiling. But it's the only way I can do it. It's because it must be that way. So this led to an interesting thing that I wanted to make sure I discussed this. I started to have some success and enjoyment with these cartoons, and other cartoonists reached out very kindly, and they, just as peers, and I felt guilty. Most of these cartoonists were old school. They did their drawings the old way on paper and then scanned it, and this very laborious and traditional technique. And I really felt like I wasn't a real cartoonist because I was using this digital machine, and it felt like my process. And because I was able, I mean, with the digital machine, you can erase. I mean, you could do things you can't do if you're working just with pen and paper. And so I just had this shadow that I was carrying when I would interact with them. And so this leads to something called imposter syndrome, which I wanted to mention. Most people have probably heard about this, but I was doing a talk with the Gotham Writers Club in New York with Athena Dixon, who's a young author, and she talked very eloquently about imposter syndrome. But it's something that I think disabled people are probably more vulnerable to, because we need accommodations. And then sometimes those accommodations can maybe make us feel like we're doing something wrong or we're cheating or something like that. So it's a very interesting and I think important thing for people to talk about, because I think the more we talk about it and then the less neurotic some of us will be, or at least that's my idea. Because once I heard Athena talking about it, it really helped me. And it really changed my view on it. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that if anybody out there is wrestling with a similar thing. Okay, so recently I've had some mobility issues. I've been kind of stuck inside, again, medical stuff. And so I was searching for a new subject for my writing, and I was feeling really very pessimistic, because my first book, which was about New England weather, was really fun to write, because every week I would go out and do an essay, and I would go out somewhere into the weather, at least outside, maybe a local spot, but it was kind of a little bit of a travel log. And I knew I couldn't do this time. I'm sort of stuck in my room. And so I was thinking that there's really nothing I can write about that's going to be interesting enough to justify a second book. And so for a while, I kind of was racking my brains and coming up with nothing. And then I decided that I would write about the moon, because the moon comes to you. You do not have to go anywhere. It comes to you every night, every month. And so I started this newsletter. It used to be a horoscope newsletter. Now it's all centered around the full moon. It goes out on the full moon. And each month I write about some different aspect of the moon. And it seems so unpromising when I started, because every poet, every writer's had a swing at the moon. It's like a piñata, it's so cliche. But I did it because it was sort of the only thing in reach. And I have to say, it was it just surprised me at what a fortuitous choice it was, because it turns out that there's a lot of people interested in the moon, and it's global, of course. And so where my New England weather book was somewhat local and of local interest, this moon project and has just, I mean, I have subscribers from every continent except Antarctica. Lots of subscribers from Asia, especially India, because they have a great, rich cultural traditions with the moon. And so it's turned out to be a really exciting and fun thing to write about, fun subject. And again, it started off very unpromising. I started off very stuck. And so sometimes you have to let your subject come to you, and don't give up hope that if you're kind of blocked, that something will come along, and it might be even better than what you might have come up with had you had all the mobility or all the money and freedom in the world. Okay, so this is one thing this is the last project I'm going to discuss, and this comes directly out of my experience with my vision issues. I mentioned how I use technology to work on getting audiobooks and reading through audio. And I have to say that it's been very successful, but at least for me, other people might disagree, or have the, your mileage may vary. But for me, I find that audiobooks, I don't quite slip as deeply into the immersive and absorbing experience that I used to when I was reading a physical book. I think maybe it's because there's a tempting to multitask, or something. You're also getting more feedback visually, even while you're listening. There's just something that I just don't almost feel physically inside the story that I felt when I was reading. Maybe it's just me, but it was the case. And so it was a real loss, and it had been years since I'd kind of felt that. What you feel, I'm sure everybody here, anyone who tuned into a public library talk, loves books and probably has that feeling when you sort of come to after you've been reading, the climax to a thriller or something for the last hour. You haven't moved, and you've forgotten your surroundings, you've forgotten yourself. It's a wonderful escape. And the only thing I could compare it to in the last 15 years was dreaming. Dreaming has a lot in common, I think, with reading, because you go into a dream, your inhibitions are totally kind of gone. You accept all the weirdness. I mean, your dreams are very weird, but you never stop and say, like, hold on. In the dream, you're buying it. And similarly, we go in with a suspension of disbelief into reading fiction. And I also always thought there was something similar with the eye movements, where we read our eyes moving side to side, and this is what I can't quite do very well anymore, but also in REM sleep, our eyes are kind of moving horizontally. And so that always just linked it to me, and it made me think, can I somehow make the dream experience into a reading experience? And so I had heard about this project that was being done at the MIT Media Lab, and it was called Dormio. It's a device that essentially programs your dreams, or attempts to influence your hypnagogic experience. Hypnagogia is when you are slipping into sleep. You're not fully into a dream, but you're also not awake. It's that middle area. Hypnagogia is when we're falling into sleep. Hypnopompia is when we're coming out of sleep. We're highly suggestible. We're we are starting to dream. And if you're woken in a hypnagogic state, you're more apt at that point to remember what you've just been dreaming, because it's part of you. You've got one toe still sort of conscious in the waking world. And so this Dormio device really fascinated me. They were using it, from what I could see, because it was covered on 60 Minutes. That's how I found out about it. The seeds they were using, that's what they call the seed phrases that they were playing for people slipping into that dream state, were usually just a couple of words, maybe one word, And then they would wake people up at the opportune moment and ask them, what are you dreaming? And they were finding that indeed the seed phrases were influencing the visual dreams that the experimentee was experiencing. And so I decided that I wanted to see if you could use text, written text, like from a poem or a book as a seed phrase, and then have a dream that was influenced by that, and whether that dream would be a sort of parallel, a stranger, but a parallel to the experience you would have had reading the rest of the poem, let's say. And so I hooked up with the Woodbury Poetry Room, which is a library at Harvard that has an incredible audio library of poets reading their own work. And it's been, they've been capturing these poets' readings for over a century. So anybody who's an audio fiend for poetry, especially, visit the Woodbury Poetry Room. They call it the listening booth online, and it's fabulous. So I hooked up with them, and I hooked up with the maker of Dormio, who's a researcher, inventor, adventurer named Adam Horowitz, who has a deep interest in dreams, and really has a great way of living amphibiously in the literary and in the scientific. And he was kind enough to lend me the Dormio device, and so that I could, from home, again being stuck at home, do this project where I would every day use the first line of a poem from read by a poet from the Woodbury Poetry Room as the seed phrase that tries to incept a dream for me, and then I would record the dream. And so it's been a really interesting it started in September. I'm halfway through. It's been really, really interesting. First, I'm going to share my screen really quickly because I want to show you the Dormio device. I did a drawing of it, and I think I'm going to be able to pull this off. Let's see. All right. Can you see? There we go.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the Dormio device that you wear in your hand. It has sensors on it, biosensors, that are reading things about. I didn't invent it, so I can't speak very eloquently to the science, but it's reading, I think, pulse, muscle twitching, and basically it's able to find out when you're falling into the sleep state, and also then when you need to be woken up in order to catch the dream that you've had. I should mention that this is a very high-tech version of a technique that authors, artists, inventors have been using for centuries. It used to, well, it still is, but it was called the steel ball technique. And the people who use this included, like, I think Edgar Allan Poe, Dali, I believe Thomas Edison. They would use this, they would go into this hypnagogic state to solve a problem or to find exciting images for their art. And what they would do is they would hold a steel ball, go to sleep in their chair, and they knew that when they fully fell asleep, they would drop the steel ball, it would hit the ground and wake them up. So they would get that slide into sleep, but not lost into the black hole of sleep. So so this is a way to kind of mechanize that, essentially, modernize it, bring it into the 21st century. So let me stop sharing. Okay. So armed with this Dormio device and all these audio seeds, I have been doing this experiment. And I have to say that if I had to stop now, I've still got halfway to go, but it's not working out quite the way I expected. I thought that, I don't know what I had in mind exactly. It was an experiment, and even when in science, when something doesn't work, that's exciting too. That's interesting too. But I was thinking that I would get, from using a poetic, the first line of a poem, I would get a kind of readerly experience, flavored by that poem, that might be comparable in a way to the rest of the poem, which I would listen to after. But it's a very, very oblique relationship I've found between that line of poetry that I hear in that vulnerable moment when I'm going into the hypnagogic state, and the dream that I experience and come out with. It's very indirect, and sometimes it's completely unrelated. And so it's just a glancing blow, I find. So it's interesting, but it's been exciting. It's been fun. I've got to listen to a lot of fantastic poetry doing it, and I've got to play with this really cool device, and I've got to spend a lot of I've got to nap in the middle of the day and call that working. So there's all kinds of benefits to this. But okay, I know we're a little bit up on time. I just wanted to I guess, okay, one last thing, and then I want to do questions because I'd love to hear from people. But one last thing, I just wanted to say that it's always difficult to know where you are in time and in history and I mean, I don't think the people, it's very difficult to zoom out and see where you are in the moment. But I think that when we look back in 50, 100, 200 years, we'll see that in 2023, we were at this extremely pivotal moment in technology, and especially concerning art. And I do not think that art, writing, really anything cultural that we do will ever be the same after this year. And I know that sounds very it's not apocalyptic, and it sounds probably overblown, but I really do think this is the case, because what's happening is that the artificial intelligence projects that have been going on behind the scenes in companies like Google or other giant companies are starting to be released. And I know that what we have access to now is just the absolute tip of the iceberg. But the things that we're able to do now in terms of generating a short story, you now have chatbots that you could suggest, say, write me a short story about, a snowman that comes alive and has a driving test, whatever. And it will write you, and you could say, and please, oh, by the way, please write it in the style of Edgar Allan Poe and in this metrical form. And it will produce in 3 seconds a very convincing simulacrum of an Edgar Allan Poe poem about a snowman having a driving test. It's very creepy and disarming, and even worse for those of us who are the artists. You now have programs where you can just describe in a sentence what you would like to paint, and it will paint it for you. You'll create a digital picture immediately based on just a sentence that you input. So you can see how this is really going to upend things, upend traditional art practice, upend the idea of what an artist is, what a writer is, upend how we interact with technology. Certainly, it's going to give wings to a lot of people. It's going to give wings to people who are disabled, who maybe want to create a film, but they can't physically get out into they can't go shoot on location, but now they're going to be able to feed the script into a program and get a pretty good film from it. And it's going to help people who are on the fringes and just don't have access to resources required often, or connections required to make a big splash or to make a reality out of an art career. And so I just wanted to play really quickly. I took a James Merrill poem. It's called The Octopus. I just wanted to demonstrate this. Again, this is the very, very early version. This is just touching the surface of what it's going to be like, but I just thought I would share it because I think at this point it's very dreamlike, which is appropriate. So I took the audio from the Woodbury Poetry Room of James Merrill, who was a Connecticut poet, reading his poem, The Octopus. And then I fed that into a AI program for it to create visuals to go along with it. And it's just a sort of background visual, but I thought it would give a sense of where we're going. And I also thought it would be nice to end this with a poem before we do the Q&A, because everybody who comes out to a reading should hear some kind of literature. And of course, James Merrill is you can't beat James Merrill. So let me see if I can share my screen one last time. Okay. And I'm going to play this for us here. Okay. Get rid of you.
The octopus. There are many monsters that a glassen surface restrains, and none more sinister than vision asleep in the eye's tight translucence. Rarely it seeks now to unloose its diamonds. Having divined how drab a prison the purest mortal tissue is, rarely it wakes. Unless coaxed out by lusters extraordinary, like the octopus from the gloom of its tank, half swimming, half drifting toward anything fair, a handkerchief or child's face dreaming near the glass, the writher advances in a godlike wreath of its own wrath. Chilled by such fragile reeling, 100 blows of a boot heel shall not quell. The dreamer wakes and hungers. Percussive pulses, drum or gong, build in his skull their loud entrancement, volutions of a Hindu dance. His hands move clumsily in the first conventional gestures of assent. He is willing to undergo the volition and fervor of many flesh-like arms. Observe these in their holiness of indirection, destroy, adore, evolve, reject, till on glass, rigid with his own seizure, at length the sucking jewels freeze.
Okay. So clearly very primitive tech, but I just wanted to show how much it can one of these programs can generate how many images, and these images are coming from they're original in the sense that they did not exist before. These are not pre-existing, and they're generated all within seconds. So I just wanted to mention that since this was about technology and creativity, I just wanted to try to put the marker down and let just say that we had an inkling when we look back at this in 50 years. We felt it a bit. It's hard to see, but we felt the revolution and the shuddering under our feet. So now I would love to hear from people and take questions. I think people can ask questions, raise their hand, or they could put it into the chat if you don't feel like speaking. So either way, and Amy, maybe you can help.
That's a question, if you don't mind. Excuse me. That very first recording you played sounded mechanical from a long time ago, but it went by very fast. Are you telling me that you could understand that?
Yes. Yes. The recording I played, that was Samantha reading the beginning of The Great Gatsby. Yes.
And that sounded normal to you?
Yeah. I mean, it does sound fast, but I can, if I just sit and listen, that's what I would listen. That's the pace at which I listen, which I think is probably the pace at which people read, speed read, or I think that probably matches it. Yeah, it's not, I mean, this is because I've been listening to it for 15 years. So it's like playing an instrument or something. I've also heard similar things about Braille. I know I discussed that. I remember with people at Easter Seals, and they were saying that unless you've learned Braille when you were young, it's very difficult to master when you're older. So it's
so you evolved to that ability due
Yeah.
to your condition. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, I see a question in the chat. Do you mind reading that, Amy?
Sure. It's from Suzanne. She asks, do you find the future of AI exciting or chilling in terms of what we writers do?
So the reason I chose the Merrill poem about the octopus was it felt appropriate because it is completely chilling and beautiful and exciting and majestic and disturbing and completely other. And I have no idea what's going to happen. And I have to say, there's a part of me that is excited to play with these new tools, especially as someone who's probably not going to run a marathon anytime soon. I'm a bit limited geographically, spatially, physically. So to be able, I mean, I said this a year, I would always say this. I said this a year ago. So I would love to, I hope I live long enough where I could write a script and the computer could make the film, because I don't have $5 million. I thought that was going to be maybe something I would see in my old age. And where I suspect we'll be there in 2 years. So there's a childlike part of me that's so excited. But then there is a part of me that feels like whenever there is a revolution that's this extreme, there's a lot of rubble, there's things get banged up. And yeah, so I don't, and I probably everybody feels at the end of their tether at this point. They're not ready for another disruption. But yeah, so it's coming whether we like it or not. And I think we just hold on tight and see what happens.
Diana has a question. Diana, go ahead and unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hey, Will, that was awesome. It's good to see you and learn so much more about what you've been doing and how you've been doing it, which I didn't really know much at all about the technology that you've been using. I'm a writer too, and so I work within an institution. I write a lot about the science going on in my institution. So I'm a little concerned too about what's coming next, because it's not as creative as the kind of work that you're doing, and probably an AI, some kind of algorithm could come up with what I come up with pretty easily. So we'll see what happens. But I couldn't understand. So I've also, I've been a writer forever. But in the olden days, when we interviewed someone, you would have to put it on tape, and then you'd have to laboriously transcribe it yourself. And then we started to get some primitive voice to text translators, and now they're really good. And now when I go into an interview, I just put on, like Microsoft Dictate, and it makes a transcript of the interview, and then I just clean it up a little bit. But I don't understand how you use text to voice for writing. How do you do that? I mean, what does it serve?
Yeah, so it's basically, you would do it if you're going to be writing, let's say in a Word document, but because you can't really read, you can't be, that as we write, we're reading what we're writing, and we're kind of going back and forth. That's problematic for me. That doesn't really work. I need to almost not be looking. I need to do this without looking, be able to write. And so then the only way to know what you're writing and where you are in the document is through audio. And so I will turn my screen off to black and then just type, and it's saying letters as I go, and then words, and then I can hit different buttons, and it can say the last sentence, the last paragraph, and I can go back and edit and then go to the beginning. So it's basically taking a lot of the visual load off you. And yeah.
How do you type if you can't see?
Yeah, I was of the generation where they taught us to type when I was in first grade, so I got lucky like that. I don't have to look for typing.
Okay, so as you're typing, you're getting audio back?
Yeah.
And,
I could type. Yeah, I could. I mean, and then as somebody who just, was a student for too long, you just get really good at typing. So
and so that allows you to know where you are in the document and go back and edit and so forth.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
I really didn't realize until you were talking about it, Will, like how much visual load there is to the editing part, right? Like I think writing emails or spewing off short things, but all of the editing that goes into it. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah. When I stopped really being able to use word processor, I realized suddenly how amazing word processors are. I had always had them, but you're like God. I mean, you can move chunks, you can delete things, you can I mean, it's incredible compared to if you're using a typewriter or if you're just dictating, where you can't have that omniscience and omnipotence. So yeah, the word processor is amazing. uh, but so is this technology that allows people to use it through audio. So
To refer back to Suzanne's question too, when you said that the technology will upend things, like that's such a hopeful view of it, because I think a lot of us who use traditional technology are like, what is going to happen? But I really like upending to make people think differently and then to give people wings. I really think that's the magic, and that's what we've been talking about here in Attleboro throughout the Big Read is, what can we change and what can we make easy? These voices we're not hearing, words we're not reading, films we're not seeing. It really is going to broaden a lot for us as well.
yeah, I was really just so thankful when I heard that you had the Attleboro Public Library had chosen this subject to focus on, because it is something that I think needs to be talked about. And again, it's as we age, even if you're able-bodied, as you age, you're going to have hearing problems, you're going to have vision problems. So this adaptive technology is in probably everyone's future to some degree. And I think what I've found after I threw a decade-long fit about losing, it's just difficult to adjust to, is that you can use technology and these workarounds to actually find things that you never would have before, and go into territory that seems it's just completely different than you would ever have expected. And I would never be doing this bizarre dream project and every sleeping every afternoon and trying a dream based on Sylvia Plath's voice had I been able to crack a book all these years. It just wouldn't have occurred. So
now you're really shining a light on, like, again, and if I can figure out a way to get a nap in every afternoon. I'm taking some notes here.
good idea.
If other folks have questions, please just shout them out. Diana's got her hand raised. Write them in the chat. We've got a few more minutes to talk to Will.
See,
Go ahead.
Elizabeth. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I had one, and Diana, go ahead first if you want. I couldn't find my hand icon. I'm out of practice. Should I go? Okay. So I had a question. Well, this was incredibly interesting and moving and fascinating. There's a bunch of writers with disabilities who I've learned a huge amount from about what it's like to live with that they're living with, but also kind of sensory things and being human. So I'm thinking of like Temple Grandin, who's autistic, or a young friend of mine named DJ Savarese, who's a non-speaking autistic poet, or who was the other one that I was thinking of? Anyway, so Golem Girl, if you've read that, but I'm interested. Oh, Steve Casisto, have you read him?
I'm friendly with him online. We've connected.
Okay, yeah, he's a friend of mine too, and I was at Artist Colony with him and one of his first guide dogs. And so I guess I'm interested in some ways about whether I know you've written the piece about voices, but have you thought about, or are you interested in writing about disability, writing about disabled artists, maybe in some of your comics, or even just kind of thinking through in your writing what happens to kind of sensation, or kind of what you can learn through these prisms, as difficult as they are? Because I have found as a reader, I'm just blown away by some of that work. I think it's incredibly important.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm working on my next cartoon, and the subject is Flannery O'Connor, who developed lupus and had to move home to Georgia and lived with her mother on the farm. And she was very ill for a long time. And at a certain point, she could only write an hour a day. And she moved around with great difficulty. And yet, in her last days, she was about my age when she died. She was in the hospital right before she died, and she was forbidden to keep working because she was she was dying. The nurses and doctors wanted her resting, but she had a notebook and a pen snuck under her pillow in the hospital, and when they were not looking, she was working on that last story. So I guess I'm very drawn to and compelled to write about these types of stories with disability, but I also I don't want it to make it sentimental in kind of saccharine way, or and certainly I take the direction from Flannery O'Connor, because she was the opposite of sentimental. She really did not complain, and she really kept her edge and her very tough worldview that I think she had. She had a very kind of a severity along with her sensitivity, and she kept that to the end. And she never had self-pity. So I feel like I'm trying to learn from these people, and part of these cartoons and these things I'm writing is me trying to find models, because as Amy was saying, this isn't something you run into necessarily. We don't hear a lot. We don't see it on TV as much. We don't read about it as much. So there aren't as many models to go to. So it's nice to find them in history and pull them out and see the reality of the art making. And I find that really moving. You also talked about using art to go into the sensations and to write about the sensation and the changing of the sensations. I mean, I was asked earlier about how can I decipher that the auctioneer voice, speed voice, and it's unconscious. It just happens slowly and gradually, and it's only when I talk to when somebody hears it and mention that I become conscious about it. But it is something that's probably worth doing, and I think a little bit in the stream project it's happening because I'm focusing very intently as I'm recording these dreams and trying to recreate them on the sensations and how dreams are very strange, because information seems to events unfold, but information is sort of also downloaded as you go. I find as you go through dreams, suddenly that, and your family's in the other room. It's almost like backstory is magically filled in at different points. And so I've been really tracking through the dreams what sensation in the dream did I learn something? Because when you say, oh, I was in this type of, I was in an airplane hangar. Well, how did you know that in a dream? Did you hear, so and these are very deep into the workings of your unconscious mind, and like the really getting into the roots of how we process at a different level. So that's kind of what I've been focusing on, thinking about, and hopefully not going mad doing that, because it's kind of a little bit in the deep end. But what you say is, I think, really smart. It's what I would expect from a great professor, to challenge me to go deeper and think about these issues. So thank you.
I know you're going. Like, is the Flannery O'Connor going to be a Globe cartoon?
Yes, it is.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I have I'm in the rotation with the Globe, so of course they could say no thanks to this one, try again. But at this point, I'm confident that I know what they like, and they're such great editors at the Globe. I've got 2 editors and a copy editor, and they've been so good.
I think you need to make a book of these, or have you thought about that?
I have, but it's like the it's a little bit like the Weather Project and this Moon Project. It's like I'm a sprinter. I just do one thing at a time, and then maybe I'll stop and look back, and some shape will emerge. And
right. No rush, right? Why?
Yeah, I'm just kind of going point by point. I mean, that is also part of having unpredictable health. I make plans, and then they get God laughs, So I find that just kind of step by step is a better approach for me, because then I feel like I'm moving somewhere, and if I miss a month because of circumstances, it's okay,
Yep. Thank you. Great answer.
Thank you for coming.
Diana, did you have a question?
Well, no, more just a comment. I think that your dream project is really interesting because I spent the last year, 2021, working on a similar project, but it was more about the waking transition. So that would be hypnopopic, did you say? Um, which I think is also a really interesting time. And I didn't notice it until the pandemic. You know, I commute to work and then all of a sudden I didn't have to commute to work. And all of a sudden, so I'd wake up in the morning usually and I'd like, oh my God, I'm late. And I have to jump out of bed and get on my clothes and, go to work. And then all of a sudden I didn't have to do that anymore. And I started to have these really interesting waking experiences that were, at first they felt very creative. Like I would have ideas of, the first line of a story I was working on, or the first phrase of a dance I was working on would come to me as soon as I woke up. But as the pandemic went on and things got stranger and the world got stranger and, the politics and everything that was happening, I started to wake up very afraid. And it took me a while to realize that what I needed to do was to just let that go and fall back asleep again. And then the next time I woke up was an even more creative space where it was like the stuff just worked itself out and it just came out. And so I just wonder, have you been working on that other end, or are you just still working on the falling into sleep?
I've just been working on the falling into, partly because that's how the tech is designed, and it prompts you to wake up and record. So I'd probably, if I wore it in the night, it would get mangled. That it's pretty fragile. But what you say is really fascinating, because I've spoken to the creator of Dormio, and he said that we've all heard that the lockdowns and the COVID pandemic did bring people into a very intense relationship with their dreams. And I think being closed in a lot, then at night, your mind, dreams can be more intense. I think if there's like pent up energy there. And also he mentioned this, that we've discussed, Adam and I, he saw this door opening ajar in the scientific world, among scientists, among the scientifically minded. And he sees that sometimes they're a little nervous because it's a wilderness in there. It's a kind of terra incognita. And but we think that we're feeling, he feels, and I'm agreeing with him, that this is going to be a really interesting space, and that more people are going to start playing with start taking their dreams seriously, because in a way we're being very colonized by media, and we're kind of a little bit enslaved by algorithms, and I think everybody feels that our attention is, we're kind of being pulled, and your dreams are not tamed. They're wild spaces. And even this Dormio device, if it proved anything to me so far, it's proved that even if you pipe in something, the dream is not going to cooperate. The dream has its own agenda. So nobody, we're not going to have like product placement. You're not going to be hearing like advertisements in your dreams anytime soon. Your dreams are going to do what they're going to do. And so I think it's kind of as we kind of merge more and more into this technological society and mediated experience of life, dreaming is going to become that walk in that hike in the woods, up the mountain. Yeah. I want to be conscious about how late it is, but I'm excited to take other questions. But if anybody has to go, I just wanted to say that's okay. You can go.
I'd just like to thank you for your very relaxed presentation style. I found that this is an order of magnitude more mentally engaging than any other Zoom meeting I've ever attended. And there's just so much food for further thought. So I thank you so much for a wonderful hour plus.
Thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, well, if I could attribute it to anything, it would be that I tuned into so many Zooms during COVID, listening to authors, and so it just feels very natural now to do it. And it feels kind of intimate. It feels like that room with the chairs in the circle. So, and thank you guys for being great and for coming. And it's very exciting. an honor, really.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Will. Looks like, we'll have you back. We'll have you back. Keep us updated.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Good night.
Amy, should we hang? Do we need to?
I was just hanging, I saw some comments coming in and I just wanted to make sure you got all of the thank yous,
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
right? But I will end the meeting. If you got all those, and really honestly, thank you so much. And we'll be talking and emailing, and
Yeah,
as you well know.
of course. Yeah, keep in touch. And Attleboro is very lucky to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Good night.